Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. I hope you're having a good Sunday. As you all know, Boots Ennis unified two of the welterweight belts, the WBA and the IBF, and he picked up the Ring Magazine belt into the bargain. He stopped Eimantas Stanionis of Lithuania in 6 rounds. Stanionis' corner pulled him out after 6. Stanionis had been floored. There was a lot of facial damage, especially the nose. I don't know if the nose was broken, but it was like a tap, pissing blood. And the corner said no more. And Stanionis looked demoralised. I said this in my post-fight review. He looked like he'd had enough, and he had that expression on his face, which was like, I don't know what to do with this guy. You know, I've hit him cleanly, which he had done. He's just too big and probably too good. And probably Stanionis, if you'd sent him out there again, he'd have just got beaten up and even further. So it was the right decision to pull him out. And no shame on Stanionis, but of course, we now have people saying that Boots, whereas before that Stanionis fight, well, he's dead at the weight, he's not what he was, he struggled on the second occasion with Chukadzian, and now we've got people saying he's wonderful, he's the best thing in the welterweight division and so on. As usual, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. That's normally what happens in life. It was a good performance, definitely. I like Boots, big fan of Boots. I've got a lot of time for Stanionis, but it must be said that was only his second fight in 3 years, Stanionis. And if you go in there with a Boots who, because the WBA belt was on the line, the £10 rehydration clause was not in place, you're going to get a Boots who's a lot healthier than if he's abiding by solely the IBF's rules. And just look huge in there, absolutely huge. Such a massive welterweight. So we shouldn't get carried away with this win, even though it's a good win. Again, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm not putting Boots down at all. But if you consider that he insists he wants to stay at welterweight, I mean, he did say, well, I'm going to sit down with my team and all. They always say that, don't they? But I think from what Eddie Hearn has said, Eddie Hearn's his promoter, and he was, shouting his virtues from the rooftops afterwards, and sucking up to Philadelphia and everything else, doing what Eddie does as a promoter. But if you consider everything, he wants to stay, according to Eddie, Boots wants to unify, become undisputed. And some of the commentators were saying, does this put him now in the Terence Crawford bracket and all that? Well, let's put the brakes on a little bit, okay? If Boots wants to stay at 147, he's got 2 more belts to collect, okay? Now, one is against Mario Barrios. One currently belongs to Mario Barrios, who's fought, I think, has he fought at lightweight, even maybe lower than that? I think he might have fought at super feather. I know he got stopped by Tank. The Tank fight was 140? I don't know. I have to check on that. He got stopped in 11 against Tank anyway. And he also lost on points to Keith Thurman. Those were in 2021, 2022. But his last fight was against Abel Ramos, and that was a split draw. And Ramos is a decent fighter, but did have, I think, half a dozen defeats on his record, and is a tough, but somewhat limited. Limited's not fair, is it? He's a good fighter. He's probably an overachiever. You could say that about Barrios. Maybe Barrios is an overachiever, because up at welterweight, like I say, he's fought at smaller weights before. He's overachieved. He's got himself a WBC title. He's currently 29 wins with 18 KOs. The 2 defeats, one to Davis at, I think it was 140 or 135, maybe 140. And then Keith Thurman. He lost a unanimous decision to Keith Thurman, and who is a proper 147 fighter. But he came back and he won a belt, and but put him in against Boots. Barrios is 29 years old now, so probably he's at his peak. He's as good as he's going to get, certainly. He'll give anyone a tough fight. He does have the height for it. I think he's about 6 foot tall. Orthodox fighter, likes to sort of box fight. There's some intelligence in the ring there. But against the huge Boots, I'd have to pick Boots all day long, to be honest with you. But it has to be said that Barrios at least has a little bit of activity going for him, because apart from that split draw, he fought Fabian Maidana, won a decision over him over 12 rounds. That was also both that and the Ramos fights were in 2024, and then he had 2 fights in 2023. Giovanni Santiago, who he stopped in 8, and Yordenis Ugas, who he won a 12-round decision over. And he had him on the floor. Ugas was on the floor, I think, twice, I think. So you have to say that, yeah, probably Barrios has come good. He's got his Indian summer of a career, or maybe maybe as we've said before, the defeats paved the way for him to learn stuff, and people are overlooking him. There's always that chance. You just never know, do you? One thinks of Buster Douglas, and just as an off the top of my head fighter who had defeats, they looked on paper like bad defeats, but he started to put it together, got his shot at Mike Tyson, and the rest is history. So maybe Barrios would give Boots a much tougher fight than people are saying, but I would still pick Jaron Ennis to win that fight, possibly by stoppage. I think quite possibly by stoppage. And then what's intriguing is, that's the WBC champion, but let us not forget the WBO champion. And what's intriguing is the contrast between Barrios and this guy, who is Brian Norman Jr., who is 5 years younger at 24, another orthodox fighter, shorter. He's only about 5'8", undefeated in 27. He's got 21 KOs, no draws, no defeats, and he won and he was the underdog in this fight. He won his WBO belt. He won, I think, on the interim belt against Giovanni Santillan. Stopped him in 10 rounds. And that was a bit of an upset, because Santillan was coming in off a very, very good win over, it was Rocha, Alexis Rocha, I think. And who he was expected to lose that. He then goes into the fight with Brian Norman Jr. as this was I think it was for a vacant interim belt or something like that, and was expected to probably outpoint Norman Jr., who was untested, but Norman Jr. was a bit of a revelation. And since then, that Santillan fight was about 11 months ago. He's fought, only a couple of weeks ago, he fought Derek Cuevas and stopped him in 3 rounds. Cuevas had a glossy record, 27-1-1, but when the going got tough, he did seem to sort of bail out. A little bit of probably more talent than he has heart, if you know what I mean. But definitely still, to some degree, Brian Norman Jr. untested, but at the same time has shown a lot in the ring, has shown a lot of fortitude, a lot of guts, quite a high ring IQ. When you think that Boots has been around for so long, you're almost tempted to say that Brian Norman Jr. is sort of maybe half a generation behind him. And again, I wouldn't rule him out. Good fighter, plenty of attributes, but I would have to go for Boots in that fight. It might be coming a little bit too early for Norman Jr. I've got a feeling that what they're going to do, what Ennis's team are going to do, is they're going to take Boots and go directly towards Barrios and try and get that belt, that WBC belt. And in the meantime, if I was Brian Norman Jr., I'd continue making defences, building up my own experience, my own resume, and then maybe they can have a fight for all the marbles. And there's no doubt, even though Boots has now got this nutritionist on board and doesn't have the £10 rehydration clause, unless he's only defending the IBF title, it's still going to be difficult for him to make that weight. It's still going to be a bit of a squeeze. Whereas Brian Norman Jr., at the age he is, only 24, he's going to be making and a naturally smaller man, it must be said, he's going to make the weight easier. So I do think that if you put a gun to my head, I would definitely pick Ennis to beat Brian Norman Jr. right now, and certainly Barrios, and for him to become undisputed champ. I would definitely think that's a very likely scenario. But let's not get too carried away. Let's not start saying, well, he's the best thing since in the welterweight division since Crawford or whatever. I mean, he was around when Crawford was in the welterweight division and was calling for Crawford. Like I say, he's not quite Crawford's generation. Crawford now, of course, in his 30s and, has long left the welterweights. But nevertheless, Boots, with the record he's got, he's rapidly becoming, the most experienced welterweight in that division. In the welterweight division, he's now becoming the guy who, if you look at his resume, even though it's not stacked, I mean, the win over Stanionis is good. I mean, there aren't any real killers on his record. But sometimes, as I've said before, it's the way you go about your work rather than the opposition itself that impresses. I want to see him, if he can make the weight, stay at 147 and become undisputed. I think that's a massive achievement for any fighter. Crawford did it twice. Inouye's done it twice at different weights. Devin Haney did it at lightweight. Whatever you want to say about Devin Haney, he cleaned up at lightweight. No argument. So, I don't know. What do you think? How good do you think Boots Ennis is? And what do you think of his resume? Because Stanionis, again, only one fight in 3 years. That was his second fight in 3 years. And Stanionis is good, but his style is not exactly difficult to fathom. He said before that fight against Ennis, he said, they said, what's your tactic? And he said, all gas, no brakes. You know what happens if you're driving a car, all gas, no brakes? Crash. Which he did. He crashed into Ennis and Ennis got rid of him. So I don't know, does that victory flatter Jaron Ennis? I'm not saying it does. I'm just saying, give me your opinions. Here's a few. Let's chew the fat a little bit and decide what we think of Ennis. I like him a lot. I'm a big fan of his. I like watching him. But I like Brian Norman Jr. as well. I think he's really coming of age, and I've got respect for Barrios. But I do think Ennis would be the last man standing. So if you agree, comments below. If you don't agree, that's fine. Tell me why you don't agree. What do you think of the win over Stanionis? And yeah, I'm looking forward to reading your comments. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button because you're helping us out. So yeah, Sunday's almost over and the darkness is closing in. I'll catch you later anyway. You have a good week ahead. Take care. Bye for now.